Good morning, guys. Today we are going to go ahead and set up our shading brushes, our basic shading brushes, and this is kind of our goal right here. So let's go ahead and dive in. I have a document. It is 12 by 9, 300 for my resolution, and I did fill in the background. It's not quite white. It's a very, very light gray. That just kind of helps me see the difference if I want to add the highlight value to it. So I have a new layer created here, and we're going to create 4 brushes. We're basically going to create a hard shading brush, a hard eraser, a soft shader, and a soft eraser. The settings that I use for these are going to differ for you a little bit depending on how you use the tablet and the pressure sensitivity. But we're going to base these off of 2 brushes. So the first one here is, these are all under the general brushes setting here. The most boring one is that hard round brush. So I have my color set to black and white, and if I go over here with my stylus and I go ahead and start, oops, I have an eraser selected. Let's do a brush. And I have my brush and I start to draw with this. You can see, okay, this is my hard round brush, and right now the opacity is checked here, so every time I kind of drag over, depending on how hard I press, it's layering up. That's not really the effect I want, so I'm going to uncheck that opacity sensitivity. So now when I draw with it, it should just be whatever my color is set to. It shouldn't really matter how much I press, and I should be good to go. The only thing I might want to do changing on this, I might go into my brush settings, and the spacing is set to 5%. It's a very small amount, but you might want to crank that down just a little bit here so that you don't get any sort of lag on that brush. So I'm going to go ahead and leave my settings like that. So really this was basically just the hard round brush here, and the only thing I'm really changing about it is I'm dropping my spacing down a little bit. Personally for me, I mean, since I want it to come out like 100% of whatever color I have selected here, I have the opacity set to 100, I have the flow set to 100, and just really make sure, again, for none of these brushes do you want to have the size sensitivity set, because that's not really going to be a helpful feature when we're shading. So make sure that that one is not checked at all. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to hit the plus, and I'm going to call that shader hard, because it's my hard edge shader. And I'm going to include the tool setting, and I don't need to capture the brush size or color because I might want to change those things up later. So there we go. That's my shader hard, and I'm going to go ahead and add a folder here. I'm going to call this shading brushes, and there we go. And now it's going to put it inside of that folder. I'm going to go ahead and drag it out, and I'm going to take this shader hard, put that one up there, and honestly I'm going to use that same basic brush for a hard eraser. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the eraser tool. I'm going to use that same brush, the hard round, and I just want to make sure that when I go over here it is taking 100% off. So that is my eraser for when I want to just knock something out completely. I want you to be gone. It doesn't matter about pressure sensitivity. As long as I kind of drag over the surface, it's going to erase 100%. I go in and change my spacing again on this too. I don't think that's as big a deal on the eraser, but there you go. So I'm going to go ahead and define that one. So that is my eraser hard, and there we go. Include tool settings. Drag that guy up. So now I got a hard eraser and a soft eraser, and we're going to move into the next part, which is the soft shader and the soft eraser. So let's go ahead and use this brush right here, which is the soft round. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so you can see which one. It's a second to last brush here. Soft round pressure, opacity, and flow. That's going to be the one that I use for both the soft eraser and the soft shader here. So I'm going to go ahead and go over here and make my brush a little bit bigger. And let's just try this with the default settings. So the default settings for this brush here are 100% for my opacity, no pressure sensitivity set to that. The flow is set to 38%. Smoothing, again, really doesn't matter, 38%. And of course, this is not checked. So as I go over here and start to work with this brush, let's check out and see how that works. Oh, and I have the eraser selected again. So let's try that one more time. There we go. All right, so as I build up with this, I want to be able to get a nice kind of slow build up of value. So it's taking me a couple passes. I can press a little bit harder, get a little bit more aggressive. I think checking the build up here with this does help a bit. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. I think honestly for me these settings, so I'm looking again 100% opacity, about 60% flow, and I'm able to get a pretty smooth layering effect with my value and tone. If I go back in with, let's say, my hard eraser here and erase this out, oops, choose the hard eraser and go like this, kind of erase that out. That looks pretty good to me. I feel like I'm able to get with the default settings there with that shader brush, like pretty much not having to change anything. I'm feeling pretty good about that. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the default settings, but make sure that you don't have streaks and a bunch of marks on it. You want to get that nice even transition depending on your pressure sensitivity. So that looks good for me. I'm going to go ahead and add that brush, and I'm going to call that soft shader. There we go. And include tool settings there, no color, no brush preset, or sorry, no size preset, and drag that right up there. And there we go. And I'm going to use pretty much the same one for the last one. So I'm going to do something different here. I'm going to go ahead and take my hard shader, and let's try this for a second. I'm going to lay in a bunch of color, basically jet black right here. And this is how I want to test out my my eraser, sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my eraser. And this is subtractive shading. So I have applied 100% black value pretty much here. I'm going to take that same brush with my eraser, the soft round pressure, opacity, and flow, and make my brush pretty big. And I'm going to see if I can just kind of take away this. So I'm going to start to click, and I'm just starting to erase out this, and I can actually subtract value from this. And within a few clicks and brush strokes here, I am starting to erase this and get down to something that I want. Now I feel like I have to press a little too hard. I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to crank up the flow a little bit more here, and that's a little bit better. I feel like I don't have to press quite as hard, and I can still get a nice even transition and tone on this. So that's good for me. That's an eraser. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the new brush, and I'm going to call that soft eraser, or eraser, eraser soft, and there we go. Those are my four basic brush settings. Sorry, the bell was ringing there. 4 basic brush settings for it. So I've got my hard shader, soft shader, hard eraser, and soft eraser. So get those set up, and then we'll experiment.